Dragon's Dogma is a game that I've seen on my homepage more times than Johnny Sins, and until recently, I've been blowing it off over and over again. But with the videos of Dragon's Dogma 2 coming out, I became progressively more interested and finally I caved. I parted with my hard-earned money and spent a whole $6 for Dragon's Dogma on Steam. I have to say that I was extremely skeptical going in, even though the reviews are very positive, and every video I've seen of the game makes it look pretty freaking awesome. Honestly, I'm a massive hater for dated games, and visually speaking, Dragon's Dogma did as much for me as a cheap hooker on a Thursday afternoon, which is the biggest reason why I held off for so long. Thankfully, however, after putting in a little bit of playtime, I've come to really appreciate Dragon's Dogma for what it offers. And although it isn't a masterpiece by any means because it does have its fair share of flaws, there's a certain charm in the game that really separates it from the rest of the competition. After playing for a couple hours, I realized that the dated graphics and really horrendous UI were immediately irrelevant thanks to the most enjoyable combat system I've ever had the pleasure of engaging with in any RPG to date. Now, for most people, it probably won't be the quote-unquote best combat system ever made. I personally think that title belongs to the Soul series, but it is the most fun by a landslide. And the reason for this is because it takes great aspects from other combat systems and shoves them all into one game, making it a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none situation. My favorite of these is the climbing system, which is really similar to what you would find in Shadow of the Colossus. It's exactly as the name would imply, a mechanic that allows you to climb monsters, and it gives you total control and freedom. You can latch onto any part of a monster within reason, of course, meaning that unfortunately you can't latch onto their feet and suck their toes because your character just can't get that low to the ground. When you find a monster to ride, it becomes almost like a mini-game because you have to juggle between all sorts of different mechanics while you're riding them. First of all, and most importantly, you have to manage your stamina. When you're just latched onto a beast or you're climbing it, your stamina will rapidly drain. Once your stamina is fully depleted, not only do you get knocked off, but your character also gets winded and has to stop for a quick break. The ladder mechanic isn't unique to climbing monsters as it's just a part of the stamina system in general, but it can lead to some pretty serious consequences regardless if you fail to manage your stamina correctly. While mounted, monsters will also sometimes act very wild in the most general sense of the word, leading them to kind of dance around in an attempt to shake you off. One time I was riding an ogre and he literally just threw himself to the ground back first. It can get you in all sorts of wacky situations, but if you learn how to use it effectively, not only does it become a very valuable tool in combat, it also makes the game feel really cinematic. It allows you to vault off ledges to strike at a beast's head, or scale a hydra as you chop at its multiple necks, severing heads one by one. Overall, while the climbing mechanic may just seem like a simple gimmick on paper, it's greatly boosted my enjoyment of the game, and I find myself constantly utilizing it in every single fight that I can. It feels increasingly rewarding as you get more used to it, and it's only one aspect where the combat in this game really outshines any other RPG. Special mechanics aside, combat in general just feels really enjoyable, and just like climbing, it becomes more and more rewarding as you continue to get better over time. For starters, there are 9 different vocations, aka classes, to choose from. You get the 3 basic vocations, starting with the fighter who uses a sword and shield, mage who uses a staff and magic, and finally strider who uses a bow and daggers. There are also 6 more advanced vocations to choose from, being Warrior, Assassin, Ranger, Mystic Knight, Sorcerer, and Magic Archer. Each vocation gets access to their own unique set of weapons, armor, and spells. On top of this, you're able to add up to 6 special abilities for your weapons. Vocations can be purchased and changed at any time at the inn located in Grand Soren, the game's capital city. First, I want to discuss the magic system because something I heard over and over again leading up to me ultimately purchasing the game was that the magic was the best you'll ever find in any RPG, and it's so flashy and cool and awesome. Overall, even though there are a lot of really insane looking spells from what I've seen, the early game magic system was really boring and it just didn't click with me at all. I know there's going to be someone telling me that I didn't give it a fair chance, but look, I'm not saying that it's bad. I've just always been biased towards melee combat in RPGs because sitting back and casting spells isn't my style. I'd much rather be up close and personal. And after playing around with all of the melee classes in this game, I think this is where the combat really shines. Each weapon, of course, has its own unique weight in the sense that daggers swing the fastest and two-handers swing the slowest, which is found in practically every RPG in existence. However, I want to highlight the greatsword combat in particular because it's one of the only games I've played that really makes the weapon feel as menacing as it looks. It balances the weight perfectly so that you aren't punished for swinging too early or too late, but you are greatly rewarded for timing your attacks perfectly. There's just a really great connection between your initial swing to when your weapon makes contact with an enemy that you really just can't find in any other game. You can land these massive, sweeping hits and just absolutely decimate hordes of enemies with one attack. As for the other melee weapons, they certainly aren't as unique as the greatsword, but they still fulfill their own niche great. Daggers are amazing for fast-paced, close-quarter combat, whereas maces and swords allow you to do a little bit more damage while maintaining a slightly longer distance and being a little less agile. My one and only complaint about melee combat is that there isn't any sort of lock-on system, which I didn't realize was such a hotly debated topic until doing a little bit of research on the subject. Thankfully, though, there is a slight aim assist that will point your weapon towards the general direction of an enemy. Next up, I want to talk about the pawn system, and although I do think it's really great overall, I have a very small nitpick that definitely needs to be addressed. For starters, pawns are this game's version of companions. The player is able to create their own unique pawn ranging from how they look to what vocation they play and equipment they use. You're able to change your pawn's class and gear whenever you wish and even use them for storage. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because once you've created your pawn, it's uploaded to the game and anybody now has access to it. There's this thing in Dragon's Dogma called a Riftstone, which is basically where all the pawns are being housed from a lore perspective. From a more technical perspective, using the Riftstone grants you access to the pawn network, where you'll find thousands of unique pawns created by other players. The game allows you to choose up to 2 of these other pawns to bring on your journey, making your party consist of 4 characters with you included. But where it starts to get even more epic is that pawns will constantly learn and dynamically change their behavior as they travel and fight with different players. For example, if I'm running towards a quest objective and there's a fork in the road, pawns will eventually learn which way is the best route and try to guide the player. So let's say that out of 10 players, 8 of them go right and 2 of them go left. Well, now the pawn is going to see that all of these people are choosing the path to the right, and that's where they'll try to guide the player through dialogue. And as more and more people use a pawn in their journeys, it constantly gets smarter and can even learn about enemy weaknesses, shortcuts, and secret paths. Honestly, I have no freaking clue what kind of black magic they were using to get this running back in 2012, but it works great regardless, and it's an awesome addition that makes the game feel so much more alive than some generic companion with the same predictable behavior and dialogue lines. Now, what I hate about pawns is that they're annoying as flip. They seriously do not shut the hell up, and although I really appreciate their input, I learned the first 20 times that goblins do not like fire. I just really wish they would be quiet sometimes. Other than that, honestly, it's a great system that I still haven't seen replicated to this day. Finally, we're going to tackle the open world and questing experience. When you're traveling on main roads, you'll always run into pawns or merchants that don't really do much aside from sit there and look pretty, but it's nice to see that the world feels lived in. And if you decide to stray from the path, you'll run into all sorts of side missions, caves, enemies, and dynamic events. There really is just so much to see, and it feels like every corner of the world is actually alive, and you always have the opportunity to do something when you're just running from point A to point B. Speaking about running from point A to point B, I have to admit that traveling in this game, although fun thanks to dynamic encounters, can still be a really big chore, and this mainly stems from the stamina system. Simply put, you run out of stamina way too fast, and what ends up happening is you either run for 10 seconds, take a breather, and repeat, or you just spam consumables to build your stamina back really quickly. Having no mount really accentuates this flaw, and it could easily be solved by just giving the player unlimited stamina outside of combat. Thankfully, there is a fast travel system, but to my knowledge, it can only be used to teleport to major towns and cities, although there is one item named the Port Crystal that allows you to place a fast travel marker anywhere you'd like, and you can find several of those throughout the game. As for questing, honestly, I think this is where the game is really at its weakest, unfortunately. Quests just feel extremely uninspired, mainly just consisting of generic fetch, escort, and kill quests with no real depth. Overall, Dragon's Dogma was an extremely fun game to play under perfect conditions, but it really failed to hook me and pull me into the game. At the time of this writing, I only have about 10 hours in the game, and honestly, I don't plan on playing it ever again. It's not necessarily a bad game, but like I stated at the start of this video, it has a lot of flaws. I think the fundamentals have a solid base and the combat is really enjoyable, but the overall experience just isn't good enough to keep me captivated and coming back every day for more. Pair that with the god-awful graphics and very questionable UI, and I just can't find a legitimate reason to play this game over modded Skyrim or Elden Ring in 2023. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.